Hey guys, welcome back to the Real Estate Monopoly. My name is Kerwin, and today we have an awesome guest. Hey, Erin Helle, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Very excited to be here with you today. Erin, I know you come from a background in the military, and we've had a few military veterans in our audience and the guests as well. And thank you so much for your service. I would love to know what lessons did that experience teach you, and how is that? How have you applied that as a real estate investor?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, a lot of lessons. I don't even think I fully could ever comprehend how much because my entire professional development as a, young from 18 until I got out at about 30 was in the military. So I think everything I know about being a professional, I essentially learned from other members of the military and from sort of the standards there. But I would say like if I had to kind of really pinpoint things, I would say the teamwork part of it would be huge because you realize I think my ability to scale in real estate has so much to do with my team and trusting the people that I hire to do, the things that I hire them for. And so,
Mhm.
which can be a challenge, especially for someone who's really controlling and for someone who flips and does projects like far away from where they currently are. So I think realizing and harnessing the power of the team and then building the right team to help you move in the right direction.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge part of it. And then just sort of like synchronizing that team. Like in the Army, it's like the operations process. Like you're just making sure that everyone is like, cohesive and synergistic and things like that.
Mhm.
And then managing timelines and stuff in that process, I think is probably the biggest thing I took away from it.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And just for some context, I think you touched on it, but can you expand on like what were you involved in the military specifically and just provide some background?
Yeah. So I commissioned as a lieutenant in 2009. So I went to West Point for 4 years and then I was an officer is like the day I entered the Army. And I progressed from lieutenant up till to major. I got out of the Army as a major and, increasing levels of responsibility. But as a 22, 23-year old, I spent a year in Iraq with 12 soldiers, and I was responsible to, keep them safe, keep them out of trouble, and still accomplish a mission. So that's what I started doing. I was an engineer, didn't really do too much engineering because at the time, women were pretty limited in, combat arms branches that were considered combat. So
Hmm.
I wasn't able to do a ton in terms of engineering, but I had a lot of great leaders that let me get out there and do a lot of stuff, especially when I was deployed to Iraq. So I did a lot of like security, a lot of escorts and things like that. So have a lot of experience as a leader, not so much as an engineer. A lot of people think, oh, you were an engineer in the Army, so that's why you got into like construction and renovations. I'm like, well, I didn't do really any engineering in the Army, just because I was pretty limited on what they would let me do. But anyway, yeah, so a lot of experience managing and leading and again, team building.
Awesome. No, that sounds like I know for a fact that's so important. I don't know if you've read Extreme Ownership by Jocko. I forget his last name, but who's in the military. And he talks a lot about like the importance of leadership and kind of like taking ownership of that team and responsibility for it. I mean, we don't have to go into like the leadership side of things, but I think that there's a lot of good lessons I'm sure you learned throughout that journey. And
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier before we started recording, you're in Nashville now. I'm sure I believe you do invest there, but by any chance, are you a fan of like country music? Is that why you?
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up in New York. I grew up outside of Buffalo and I was
Nice.
raised on country music. Like 90s country is my thing.
Love
Um,
that.
yeah. So it's cool to be here where there's, copious amounts of concerts and live music everywhere.
I'm sure that makes it a really great market as well. And I do want to talk about like your selection, your market criteria, and things like that. But first and foremost, I believe that. So I want a big theme I want to explore in this episode is time freedom, and I believe in whatever you're willing to share. But you had like a diagnosis that was very life changing for you. I wanted to kind of that be like the beginning of my question. How did that diagnosis really impact your perspective on the time you have right now? And how did that create a sense of urgency that maybe pushed you towards real estate or propelled you throughout that journey?
Yeah. Yeah. So just like to kind of explain what happened about 5 years ago, I found out that I had a heart condition that has two symptoms. They are sudden death and syncope or fainting. And a lot of times when you faint, your blood flow gets cut off. So even if you come back from that, you probably have brain damage. So a pretty like life altering diagnosis. Interestingly, I've had it my entire life. It's congenital. I was born with it. And I had some episodes, particularly when I was in the army, but I didn't know. I fainted a few times, but I didn't know. Of course, don't know for sure if they were this long QT syndrome, which is what my diagnosis is. But anyway, when I got diagnosed, I had just gotten out of the army, which really wasn't a choice. We had our first kid. My husband and I were supposed to deploy at the same time, and I just couldn't leave her. She would have been 6 months old. I had a hard enough time literally dropping her off at daycare down the street, and I just could not fathom the idea of like sending her to our parents' house and letting them raise her for a year or more. And so anyway, I got out. I literally resigned the next day. I submitted my request for resignation because I could. I had that flexibility. I had already fulfilled my obligation, and they approved it like within 3 days. And I was out 5 months later, which is a really quick turnaround time. And there's a lot of things you got to do to get out of the military. So I was very busy. I had a baby. I had a deployed husband. I just didn't really think about it. I didn't process it. And then I got out of the army and suddenly had like no career, no professional contacts. And I was just hanging out with a very young child. She wasn't even one yet. And she couldn't talk to me, and I was bored, and I had a very, very rough time transitioning. And while this was all happening is when I got diagnosed with my heart condition. And my mental health was bad at the time. I was in a really bad place. This made it significantly worse. But eventually, once I sort of got over the fear of it, and I realized, any of us could die at any time, and I could waste the time I have left and potentially even make it come sooner because of how stressed I was and how I just like sort of wallowed in this stress and this really scared place. I decided I'm just not going to live my life like that. And one of the things I'd been considering doing for a long time was real estate. And so I said, I'm just going to go for it. And I couldn't get life insurance. So one of the things that I had a small life insurance policy, but I couldn't, wouldn't ever be able to like renew anything after that once I was diagnosed. And so I my a huge like motivation for me was buying a Disney timeshare so that my family could travel to Disney every year. If something were to happen to me, I kind of made my husband promise that. And I said that was my life insurance policy. But that was really, really motivating for me. And then I started networking and started finding my professional contacts again and my purpose. And I've just scaled it in a way that I didn't even know was possible. Really, I took my net worth from 120,000 to 1.6 million in about 4 years. And I actually, in the last year or so, have turned down so many opportunities, which if you had told me that 2, 3 years ago, I would have laughed because, it's really hard to start a business. It's really hard to get this up and running and get it scaling. But I got to the point where I said, I want this time freedom. I want to be able to hang out with my kids. My kids they're only so young for so long. I want everything to be able to go to them, and I want to give them my full energy. And this business has allowed me to do that. And like this weekend is a great example. My one of my kiddos was in urgent care all night Friday and for an ear infection. And then my other kiddo was up all night last night. I just got back from dropping her off at school late. We had to go to urgent care this morning. She has a urinary tract infection. So I dropped everything this morning, was able to take her to the clinic, take her to get her antibiotics. She wanted some pancakes before we went to school. And I'm able to do all that. And that's what, if I don't know what I would have done if I had to work. And when I was at the doctor's office, actually, one of the nurses got a phone call from her kid's daycare, and she's like, I can't pick her up. I got to call my husband. I cannot miss another day of work. I can't leave again. And my heart went out to her. Like, I don't know how, especially now with this time of so much sickness and illness with these kids. And the schools being so wary to let anybody who has like a sniffle in the school. So anyway, that's like what it's all for me. And I think to me, I can define success by being able to choose who I accept as a coaching client. Like if I know someone is going to be just like a challenge and difficult, I won't take them on as a client. And you don't always have that luxury, but I'm there and I'm really glad. And the best part
Yeah.
about this business is anyone could do what I've done.
I love that. That's awesome. And so many things I want to dive into there. First, I mean, I can't even imagine how hard that would be to like have to choose between. I'm sure it was a career that you've built towards your whole life towards, and then your child. So that's really hard. And um, I think that a big takeaway I'm getting, and I'm sure my audience will get as well, is like there's a sense of urgency where maybe people don't necessarily need that diagnosis to like realize that our time is limited. In previous interviews, I've heard you say, I mean, anyone can die. You never know when you're gonna die. It's pretty morbid, but it's true. Like your time is limited, so that's why it's so important to have that time freedom and be able to just control and have like a say.
Totally. And you can look at that like in a really, really scary light, and which I did for probably a solid year, maybe even longer. And I was like afraid to go to sleep. I was afraid I wasn't going to wake up. I was just afraid. And you just get nowhere. No, no one else's life stops when you get this, a life altering heart condition or anything. It's only you. And I just chose in that moment, like, to just not dwell on it and not let it define me. And now, I used to not even be able to talk about it without getting emotional. And now I'm just like, I can't believe I wasted so much time in that headspace. And like I told you how what I've done in 4 years, had I started 2 years before that, my net worth would be like 3 million plus by now. But
Mhm.
it is what it is.
No, that's awesome. You're making progress, and that's really inspirational to see. So I did want to pivot a little bit because I know, like, of course you're doing a lot of deals, and you have a 91 unit portfolio, I believe. What were some common mistakes maybe that you're seeing in your clients or that you made at the beginning in the onset of your real estate journey?
Yeah. Well, I think in the beginning, what I did and what a lot of people do is sort of self reject. They say, they see a deal and the numbers don't work. So, but if they offer 15K less, maybe the numbers do work, but they're like, the seller's not going to accept it. So they just don't offer.
Mhm.
Or, I mean, maybe the numbers do work, but then they're like, well, what if this happens? And then they end up getting, that analysis paralysis. But I think a lot of that stems from being overly conservative. And they're like, okay, I have this 10% capex, but also what happens if this happens? And then they're like, I need an extra 7 grand for the roof. Or like a lot of newbies think 25 grand for the roof when roofs don't cost that much money. So anyway, I think that's that concept of like self-rejecting and then being overly conservative and then just convincing themselves that those are the reasons for not offering or for not investing when really they're just excuses. Um, and I think, finally just sort of putting that aside and just saying, like, I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm going to put this out there. And worst case they can say is no. And I'm going to learn something and just really knowing that that's the only way you're going to make progress.
Yeah, no, we completely agree. So we're in the multifamily space, but we came from we used to wholesale and flip, and with a lot of single family, we just would always put out offers. You got to put out offers. It was like, and I know you're a big believer in KPIs. And that's something that one of our KPIs was just how many offers are you making, how many like people are you calling, how many people are you reaching out to, and same thing with now in the multifamily space with our letters of intent. We just try to obviously, if it makes sense and within our investment criteria, will reach out to the broker and make an offer. And a lot of times they want that too. So I know that you are also involved in syndications. You're also involved in multifamily properties. I want to dive into that, but I did mention something that I want to circle back to, which was the market selection, because I think this is kind of a good time to bring that back up. You're investing in, I believe, Nashville. I think I heard you mention one time Kentucky. In general, so you don't have to give like any specifics of a market, but what are you looking for in your market selection criteria, and how are you kind of mitigating the impacts of the economic uncertainty that a lot of people might be expecting right now?
Yeah. Well, really the places that I've chose to focus now have a lot to do with the team that I have in place because in order to scale, you have to have brain capacity and energy to scale. If you are like bogged down by tenant issues and property management issues and you're sort of just like stuck in that part of it, you don't have any space to continue to invest. So for me, our sort of main three markets are Marion, Illinois, Clarksville, Tennessee, and Jacksonville, Florida. And it all has to do with the team. And so when I've and we do buy Airbnbs in other places. but we use Evolve to do that property management, and they do it anywhere. So that's sort of the team there. And it's different when you just have one property. But you still have to look for, competent property management in those areas. And it's different for short-term rentals, but sort of our bread and butter, like these small multifamilies, it is all about the team and knowing that, especially because we're still in the military. My husband's still active duty. So we move whenever the Army tells us to move. And we'll continue to buy here in Tennessee, even when we're not here. So I know, like, I can call my property manager up, who's a realtor. It's required in Tennessee for the property managers to be realtors. And she will go and she'll meet my contractor out at the property, and they'll tell me the state of the property, whether it's going to make a good rental, what it's going to take to get it there. And I completely trust them. I've been working with them for like 4 years now, 4+ years. And it just happens. Like, I'm like, here's the deal. And they know, like, I do trust them, and that I'm going to bring them business. So I don't want to say that they drop everything for me, but they are willing to get out there quickly so that they can help me make that next purchase, because that's more doors they can manage, more properties they can renovate. So I think that's like a huge part of it is your team. I think you can
Mhm.
honestly find deals anywhere. But the most important thing is figuring out what your strategy is. Like, I have people that come to me all the time that say, I want total financial freedom. I want to be financially free. I think I want to wholesale. And I'm like, time out. There's nothing passive about wholesaling. There's no freedom involved in wholesaling. Wholesaling is more than a 9 to 5 job. It's insane. It's really hard. It can be really lucrative, but it's really hard. And you've got to manage a team. And in order to scale, it takes a lot of work. And so that's really what I do as a coach, is help make sure people's goals align with the strategy that they're pursuing. And in a lot of ways, the market has to be in alignment with that too. Because if you're saying, I want to just buy like once a quarter, I want to buy an Airbnb in a place I want to go, then, you're probably not looking in Podunk, Kentucky. You're looking in places you want to go, right? And you got to look at the vacancy rates, and you got to look at the property management and all that stuff. So there's a lot that goes into it, but I think now with the phase that I'm at, I don't think I'll be looking for a new market anytime soon. I will just
Mhm.
focus on those, with the exception of this like one-off Airbnbs in certain places. I will definitely just be focusing on the places that I have a team, because it just is so easy for me to just pick up a property and keep scaling.
I love that. I love that answer. That's so funny you say that, because we started wholesaling and we were all like, we read Rich Dad Poor Dad. We were like, oh, we're gonna get financial freedom, all this passive income. It was a job and it was really hard to balance. We ended up realizing this was not the tree we wanted to climb up. And of course, I
Totally.
mean, we don't regret it, because we see wholesaling as like the gateway into real estate with a lower barrier to entry than other real estate vehicles. But still, like that's why we ended up picking multifamily. And so I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to know, like, what advice, or how do you provide guidance for a newer investor when they know, let's say their goal is time freedom, but they don't have a lot of money, or like what advice would you give to someone at the beginning to help them make sure they're choosing that right real estate vehicle?
Yeah. Honestly, this is like the easiest part of what I do. Basically, what I have to do is just make sure that my clients are doing their homework to define their why. And if they can like really, really reflect on that and get honest with themselves and say, this is what I want my life to look like, then it's so easy to put a strategy in place, because the strategy is then chosen for them, and I make them do their why, set their goals, which are hopefully based on their why, but a lot of times they're not. And then I also make them do like a financial, like, assessment, and they got to look at their assets and their liabilities and where their money is coming and going. And that's really eye opening for people too. But interestingly, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I got this email from one of my clients the other day that said, she's had a really rough year. She lost both of her parents this year, and she's just like, I've been having a hard time getting back on my feet, and going through this financial exercise has made me realize how afraid I am of the finances and the money, and how it's just like has this hold over me. And as I work to like do this exercise and figure out what's happening with the money, where it's coming and going, my life is starting to fall into place. She's like, my house is getting cleaner and everything is just getting easier and I'm feeling better. And I'm like, it's really cool that you've identified that and correlated that, because people do not realize the hold that money has over them. And when we're not talking about it and we're not looking at it, and I mean looking at it like daily, like sometimes even hourly for certain people, until you get a really good handle on it, then it controls you in a way that you don't even realize. So anyway, totally went off on a tangent, but like kind of back to helping people get started is it's really just harnessing the power of being in control of your finances, which comes down to understanding your finances and understanding your spending habits. And that's really powerful because you realize when you look at it, you're like, holy crap, I spent this much money on eating out and I have all these TV subscriptions which are like out of control for anybody. And you realize like how easy it is to get rid of those things without affecting your life, without negatively affecting like your quality of life, but that can help you to move towards your goals in a way that you wouldn't have been able to realize if you hadn't have done that homework and done that reflection.
Yeah. No, I'm really glad you mentioned that, almost like a case study of one of your clients, because earlier
Yeah.
before we started recording, you mentioned how, and especially when it comes to investor psychology, how women and men differ when it comes to investing in finances.
Yeah. So I did a dissertation on investor psychology, and it didn't start off this way, but it sort of morphed into an assessment of men versus women. And I found over and over again that women had this like very low level, self-reported a very low level of self-confidence. Women are better investors than men in all categories, like 100% of the time across the board. And it's fascinating. Like it can be from like a fraction of a percentage point over like a 30-year portfolio and looking at hundreds of thousands of portfolios. And then it could be up to like 16%, a 16% difference just by like having women on a team or just looking at women's portfolios. So it's just interesting because women just look at investing so differently. And I think women in general want to be reinforced. Like they want their next move to be someone to tell them, yes, you're doing the right thing. And this a lot of times is painted in a really negative light. Like women have to go to the bathroom together and women can't make a decision without, whatever, their best friend or their husband telling them what to do. And what I try to teach women is that actually is part of what makes you a good investor, because you are looking for someone else to look at it from another set of eyes, a different perspective. And that's not a bad thing when it comes to investing or making a major life decision. Women also tend to look at their portfolio from a much bigger perspective than just making money, right? Like a lot of men would say, I just want to make money, I want to build wealth. But women are like, I want to build wealth for this reason, or I want to do it because of this. And they typically have more reasonable expectations, but B, more like tangible things that they're striving to do, which allows them to ride out the market cycles, which obviously we know markets cycle. More women came out of the '08 housing crisis millionaires than men did, significantly more women. And it's because they held on to their portfolios through that. They didn't just jump ship like so many men did. And so many men do because they see like this hot stock and they go after it. And women are much less likely to do that based on my research. So this is a great lesson for men and women. And I tell people all the time, invest like a woman. You have the capability to get great returns just by who you are. And that's a good thing for men to learn too. Like, stick to the plan. Don't constantly be selling off your stock or selling off your properties and trading and things like that, because that significantly decreases your returns over a long period of time. And that's one of the main reasons that men have lower returns. So anyway, I think it's fascinating because now anytime I'm in a bunch of like women masterminds and women groups, and I always hear these women say like, my partner just cares about next year and I'm looking at the 10-year plan. And I'm like that. And then they'll say like, I'm not a very good partner because I'm really type A or I'm really demanding. I'm like, that's what makes you a good partner. So don't apologize for that.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. And it's very obvious that that all the research you've done, all the knowledge you've accumulated has contributed to your success as a real estate investor. And I'm really grateful for that. And so obviously I know that you eventually did make that transition into multifamily to an extent, because you're probably like a little diversified from single to multi. I personally, my brothers and I, we invest in 100 plus units, but funny enough, I was at a conference like few days ago, and a guy walked up to me. We were having a conversation, and he mentioned that he's made more money in small multifamily deals than in the larger ones. So it's in most cases for him. So I was just really fascinated by it. I've always been aware of like the opportunities in the smaller units. So to kind of like leeway into that, how has investing in small multifamily, like what drew you to that? Why not just stay in single family?
Um, I think for me, I like the small multifamily. It just seems like a really low level of stress for me. Like I deal with a lot of anxiety, and I don't want this to define my life. I don't want to be like constantly working or constantly thinking about work. And so when I think about like the sort of category that seems the least stressful for me, that is these smaller multifamily properties, because single family homes, when your tenant moves out, they're just vacant and you're on the hook for all the expenses on that property and there's no income. Excuse me. And then large multifamily typically requires partnerships and money from other sources, which I've done before. I've done a lot of partnerships when I was getting started, but now again, because I don't want to have to answer to anyone. I don't want to owe anybody anything. I don't want to be like on the hook for a report on this day at this time, or have to, we have a water heater go out. I don't want to have to call three partners to decide whether or not we're going to replace it. And
Mhm.
that's just where I've learned that in the last couple of years as an investor. So for me, that small multifamily that we can get into ourselves and continue to scale reasonably is just that sweet spot. And so we didn't start here. We started with single families.
Mhm.
And the thing I tell people too is, if you want to be like a big 100 unit plus investor, then start there. You don't have to buy a single family and then buy a duplex and then a quadplex and then a 10plex and then 20 units. Like there's no progress, there's no progression here. Like you start where you want to be, because the process is the same, whether you're buying a single family home or 200 of $500 million property with 200 units. The process is the exact same to close and to purchase. So I think
Yeah.
it's important that people realize that.
No, I love that. That's awesome. And of course, for us, like I think you also have the benefits of scale, right? Like you mentioned. Now, obviously, when the 100 units, the property management is going to be different from a 10 unit. And just for context, for you, like we've had a lot of guests come on that discuss the 100 plus units, but I'm really excited to kind of dive into the property management side of things for the smaller multifamily properties. How are you approaching that? Like, I guess this might be a limiting belief or a misconception that it's typically harder to find good property management for the smaller multifamily properties because they're smaller, so there's less cash flow. But how have you kind of been able to overcome that?
I mean, I haven't had that experience. Like we have a 10 and a 12 unit in two different markets. Those are our biggest. And the property manager just treats them like any single family home. And the nice thing is, like, the more units that you have, the less your property manager charges you. So I'm at a 5% management fee with my property managers, which is ridiculous. Like when I think about how much they do, and more so how much they take off of my plate, it's worth way more than that. But they're making money, they're happy. So I don't know the ins and outs of what they do. I was a property manager on one property because I couldn't find competent property management, because it was in a really rural area of Nashville, and I hated everything about it. I was such a pushover. My tenants would be like, oh, water came through the back door and my kids' clothes got wet. And I'm like, here's money for Amazon, go buy them some new clothes. And then next thing I know, the neighbor's like, oh, they said that you gave them this much money for Amazon, like where's mine? And it was just a disaster. I was such a bad property manager. But anyway, and I hated it. I hated like getting messages from them. I hated kind of being on the hook for that. So that I won't do it. I refuse to do it. I won't buy a property that I don't have management set up for. But that's about all I know about property management.
No, no worries at all. That's actually awesome. That's like a great testimony to how important it is to like outsource it, because that's why you have that third party to take care of it, you know?
Yep.
That's awesome. I love that. So there's multiple different topics. We have a speed round at the end of the episode, so I want to make sure we get to like the highlights. But first, you're also, I know you invest with your IRA, which is a flex. I was so excited when you started talking about it. It's really cool. Can you maybe explain for anyone that doesn't know? Because I think a lot of people in our audience, like their parents, for example, or they themselves, have an IRA with like a W-2 job. And I just would love it if you could maybe break down why you chose to invest that by your own means and by your own like
Yeah.
choices, and how you're doing that, and maybe like how that's kind of a form of freedom that the people in charge are, I don't know, I don't remember what you called them, but they don't really necessarily want you to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So we had our both my husband and I had our IRAs in mutual funds, totally managed. And they were making nothing. I mean, I had like almost 70,000 in it, I think. And I was making like $900 a year. So all the money in it was essentially money I put into it. So it was growing, but I was maxing out my contribution every year, and same with him. And so I I didn't really have planned to do this. I think my third deal was in my IRA because I sort of got hooked. I bought my first single family home, which was turnkey. Then I did a flip, and I in the middle of that flip, or right as I put it on the market, I had no money left. I spent everything on those first two deals. And then I wanted to scale, and someone told me about self-directing your IRA. So I moved my money over there, which my manager, financial planner, whatever that term is, didn't want me to do that, because they told me I couldn't do it, and they told me I was going to pay all these penalties, and it was going to cost me all this money to transfer it. It was all lies. They just didn't want me to let it go. And I found too, like, a lot of my friends have done this since, and people get really insulting toward the end. Like when you're like, I'm doing it, just liquidate my funds. Like they resort to insults. And that's how you know you're making the right decision, because they're like, you're never going to make any money. And it's just like, okay, you really didn't have to say that. But
Yeah.
anyway, I moved it over, and then I found this triplex, and I was going to try to get a loan on it. I didn't quite understand that there are specific lenders that will loan against your IRA. They're non-recourse lenders, because your IRA, the only kind of loan you can get in there is a non-recourse loan. And this is what's really cool about your IRA, is that you can't it's protected from you, and you're protected from it too. So like if there were to be an issue and the lender needed to like go after what you owe on that property, they can't go after anything more than what's in that account. So that's where the non-recourse comes from. They can't go after you as an individual. They can't go after your LLCs. That's just a benefit of your retirement account. It's just limited to that account. So, and I don't know if you remember like the OJ Simpson trial. I'm from Buffalo, so it was like a pretty big deal when I was a kid, but he was found innocent in criminal court, but then guilty in civil court, and was supposed to pay all this money. And he got away with not doing it because he put all of his money in retirement accounts, and they were like virtually untouchable. So lesson learned, don't be like OJ Simpson, but maybe financially arrange yourself the way he did. So anyway, so back to the IRA. So I moved my money over to the IRA. I found out my lender told me they could do it. They were just a traditional lender. And then we get to close to closing, and they're like, no, we can't do it. And then I learned you have to find a very specific lender, and they typically require a significantly higher down payment, like 35 or 40%. And they're going to have a way higher interest rate, like 2 or 3% higher than whatever par is. But it's doable. And so I ended up getting rid of, not pursuing that one because I couldn't afford it with the funds in my IRA. And I found a duplex that I could afford. And that duplex I've owned now for 4 years. I bought it right before my kid was born. She just turned 4. It makes me over $1,100 a month. So it's a 2% property, $65,000 purchase. Each side is rented for $650. So it brings in $1,300 a month. After everything is paid to the property manager and trash, I bring in $1,170 a month. And so I make more in a month than I was making in a year when it was managed by Wells Fargo or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, but there's so much more that you can do it with your IRA. You can loan money. You can become a private money lender. You can invest in businesses. There's a lot of opportunity there that, like you said, the industry does not want you to know about, because the only person that benefits when you self-direct is you. The firms, Wells Fargo, Charles Schwab, they don't benefit anymore. So it's kind of a secret, but it's a huge, huge tax benefit, a huge opportunity to grow your wealth without taxes. And it's a way to scale the money that you're putting in there that is probably not happening with the way you have it right now.
No, that's such a powerful tool and a hack, honestly. In the past, I believe that you've also invested in like syndications. Is that right? Or
Yep. And most of my syndications are actually in our IRAs because um they require, it's cool because like you don't, I personally really don't, I want everything to be passive, but I want my IRAs to be like exceptionally passive because I can't benefit for them from them for a very long time anyway. So I don't want to be like putting a lot of work into it. So you can invest in syndications and you can send $25,000, $10,000, $50,000 toward these syndications. So anytime we get to the threshold of like, okay, we have this money now that is just income from our other syndications and our other properties, then we just put it toward another investment. So that scale is happening significantly more than even our own personal investments because they're tax protected.
yeah, no, that's so awesome. I love to hear that. And yeah, no, you shared a ton of wisdom today. It is time for our speed round. Erin, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. All right, let's do it. Number one, what has been the biggest failure that you've encountered along your real estate journey, and what did you take away from that experience?
Yeah, I got into a really, really bad flip right before COVID hit. It was just a super expensive property, very affluent area, super high end. It was a disaster from the start. I hired the wrong contractor, finally got it on the market, and then COVID hit. And it was very scary. I thought I was going to lose everything. My monthly mortgage payment was like $4,800. I literally did everything wrong. I fell in love with the property. It was really emotional. I hired the first contractor that, said they could do it. And I kind of knew they weren't ready for it, but I was just eager. And then Mark listed it 2 days before COVID. Nobody set foot in that house for 10 days because of COVID. Somebody came in, made us a lowball offer, and I sold it. Had I held on to that property for 3 months, I would have made a significant amount of money. But anyway, I literally thought I was going to lose everything as a result of that property because all my other income streams basically came to a halt because I was so focused on this property and so stressed and overwhelmed by it. But what I learned is I lived to fight another day and I got through it and I would do it again, even knowing, what could have happened if I held on to it because that opened up capacity to continue to move forward.
Awesome. To kind of fast forward to the present, where's your business at today, and what are you aiming to accomplish moving forward?
Yeah, so I think that I've had a couple sleepless nights lately thinking about what the next step is. And interestingly, once you put stuff out to the universe and you start thinking and looking for it, somehow it presents itself to you. And I have an opportunity to develop some commercial lots into like downstairs commercial, upstairs residential.
Mhm.
And I think that's the next big thing for me. So I don't know. I mean, scaling is 100% there. We have a lot of equity in a couple of properties that we probably have to sell in order to scale. So figuring out what that looks like, when to sell. But yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm ready to kind of take it to the next level. Dipping my toes into developing. I don't want developing as a lot. It's sort of on the realm of wholesaling, like just very busy, a lot of work. But I'm really intrigued by it. And I think if I can sort of start now when my kids are a little older and like full time in school, that would be something that I'll probably pursue. So I think that's kind of the next step.
That's awesome. Sounds like you're growing, and good problems to have, new problems. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And it's exciting. You get like a little bit like that anxious energy and you're like, you're flexing a little bit, you're stretching yourself
Mhm.
a little bit.
Love it. Love it. If there's one book that you could recommend to our audience, whether that's personal or business or both, what would that be?
Yeah, I would say What Your CPA Isn't Telling You by Mark Kohler. It's very foundational. It's a lot like Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's very like elementary and basic, but it teaches you the benefit of being a business owner and teaches you how just owning one rental property makes you a business owner and allows you to tap into all these like loopholes and tax benefits that you wouldn't otherwise be able to tap into.
Yeah, that's awesome. Tom Wheelwright said that the tax code is just written to like essentially incentivize you to not pay taxes, but it's explaining how not to do it. I butchered that, but yeah, Tom Wheelwright's
Yeah,
also a
no.
great resource.
Yeah, I love it. I'm on board.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much. You shared a ton of gems today, but if there was just one piece of advice that you'd want our audience to walk away with from this episode, what would that be?
Yeah, definitely figure out what life looks like set your path to get from where you are now to that, and then just go after it. Ruthlessly pursue it, and you'll be amazed at what happens in a year.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Erin. It was a pleasure meeting you and chatting with you. If anyone in our audience wants to find out more about you, learn more about anything you have to offer, or just follow you on your journey, where can they go to do that?
Yeah, you can email me, Erin, ERIN, at bcglobalinvestments.com. I'm on Instagram at the Erin Helle _investor coach, and I'm on Facebook, the Erin Helle, and my website is bcglobalinvestments.com.
Perfect. Thank you again for being here, Erin. And thanks everyone for tuning into the show today. If you guys have any questions or comments, hit us up on Instagram at Donis Brothers, or just reach out to us. Let us know down in the comment section below what you thought. Leave a 5-star review if you would. That would be awesome. Or share it with a friend. And guys, let's get out there and take action. Have a great rest of your day.